and welcome to another Doctor's Assistant 1 video. Today I'm doing a review of Doctor Who, We Are the Daleks. First of all I'll be going through the packaging. You've got the sort of old sort of 1980s even sort of Doctor Who logo. Sylvester McCoy and Bonnie Langford in We Are the Daleks by Jonathan Morris. Featuring Nicholas Briggs as the Daleks, obviously, and then you've got like the banner and the sort of Seventh Doctor sort of face, as well as Time Vortex effect. Brand new adventures, full cast audio drama. Big Finish in the little corner there. The audio adventures of Doctor Who, and then you've got the Seventh Doctor, Mel, and the Daleks, as well as some pound coins there. Really cool fiery effect and that, and then this tower, as well as some video gamey stuff, and then Game Over and that, and then you've got the sort of standard sort of cover on the inside, as well as the discs with the printed thing on there and that. Then on the spine you've got Doctor Who, We Are the Daleks, Big Finish, 201, meaning it's the 201st or one episode in the monthly range. And then on the back you've got the cast list as well as the synopsis for the story, so if you want to pause to try and read that, you can now. Now I'll be going over the actual story and what I thought of it, and that, not to say that I don't like the story, it's just I know it'll sound like I don't like the story because I can't fully remember everything that happened in the story, because it flew by very quickly. Like, pacing wise, it very much feels more like a new series story, and there are quite a few little different elements here and there that made this monthly range release actually feel more new series than classic Who-esque, which as a person who's grown up with the new series, I'm fine with that. It's just that as a person who's conscious that the monthly range really, at least since its conception last time I checked, is trying to emulate more the classic series, this might be quite a bit of a drastic change for some listeners, and so I'm just sort of telling you now, forewarning you if you are new to Big Finish or whatever, which, depending on your stance or which one you grew up with, might make this a better release and or easier listen, and or vice versa, a bit more of a difficult listen, or it might take you out a bit more, depending on, as I say, which era you grew up with and which one you have more nostalgia for, I guess. But yeah, this is almost like the story was written for me in particular in mind, because I live in Bradford and some of this story is set in Bradford, or Bradford is mentioned like once. It's not really set in Bradford, which is a bit disappointing. It's got the Daleks, which I adore. I love the Daleks. I kind of like the Daleks more than the Cybermen, although I do agree with people that the Cybermen, there's probably more stories you can do with them and that than the Daleks, but then again the Daleks have been used more, so it kind of makes sense that people would feel like we are running out of Dalek stories. And then out of the 1980s Doctors, so Peter Davison, Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy. Sylvester McCoy is probably my favourite of the three. He's the most interesting anyway, in my opinion. And yeah, and then there's also retro video game type things as well mentioned. And the video game sort of side of this story is very much both integral to the sort of story and also is weaved into the story very well. Part 1 is a brilliant setup, is really well paced from what I remember, really sort of, maybe not atmospheric, but just very sort of well thought out, well plotted, very methodical and that. I thought part 3 was probably the weakest part to the story, overall to the 4-part story. I think from what I remember it was the one that I was least engaged in, and or I started disengaging with the story a bit. It felt like the Doctor was on the high, on the winning sort of streak, as it were, and then it just felt like for like X amount of tracks, like, and or minutes, the Daleks didn't really counteract him being on the winning side until they did, and then I was like, wait, why is it taking them this long to do that? Just thought that was a bit odd. I thought it was funny how the year is 1987, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the same year, because I was playing this on my Wii U yesterday, on the Virtual Console thing. Or that I bought it from. Super Mario, the original Super Mario or Mario, was released in 1987. So coincidence? I think not. What else? Yeah, the video game stuff kind of reminds me of, if you've seen the Sarah's Jane Adventure story with the sort of video gamey two-parter story there. It kind of reminds me of that. But yeah, as I say, it's that sort of plot device or element of the story even is very much integral or weaved into the story very well, and a really cool revelation, as it were. Speaking of, well, not revelations, Resurrection of the Daleks, there's an element of Resurrection of the Daleks that's kind of used in this story quite effectively and really well. There are a lot of just different elements and different things from different other stories and aspects of other stories that work really well here. There's a really funny line that Mel has really early on of like, have you tried turning it off and on again, like IT crowd type thing, that I thought was funny, as well as the Seventh Doctor having the infamous line of, oh, you've redecorated, oh, I don't like it, and that there are quite a few little sprinkled humorous bits in this story. However, it is a rather sort of dark, not intense, but yeah, very dark sort of story, and that. And you do, I think it's either at the latter end of part 3 or beginning early on in part 4, I can't remember, but there is a really interesting part where Sylvester McCoy's Seventh Doctor is pitted against this woman person who is representing like the Daleks, or going to be representing the Daleks for the UK, to which they both sort of have this really interesting debate and or discussion about his morals, not even so much his morals, but his sort of political stance and hers, and you know, who is actually right and who is wrong. And they address why the Doctor is dressed as he is, because I was so confused when I first looked at the cover. I was like, wait, why is he not in his either season 25 or season 26 sort of costume, you know, the sort of cream jacket or the brown jacket. They basically address it really early on. Another element that's very new series-esque, as well as the pacing, is the fact that the story started with just some of the story, and then had the title sequence, and then had the rest of the story. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the rest of the other 3 parts were that same sort of format. They had a pre-title sequence part, like pre the title sequence, they had a little bit, like a snippet of the story, and then the title sequence, and then the rest of the story, which is so very new series, and that not classic Doctor Who, that it really threw me off at first. I mean, I'm fine with it, and in some respects I kind of prefer it, but it's, it was just really weird. It really sort of threw me out, if I'm not mistaken, it's the only Big Finish audio that in my collection and all that I've listened to so far that has had this happen in the monthly range, or in any release really. Obviously maybe minus the 10th Doctor ones, but please do comment below if this was just a thing they did for a handful of monthly range releases, or if that's something they started doing and that. But yeah, I'm under the assumption, because of certain things that are in this story, that this story is set before Remembrance of the Daleks, which would make sense, seeing as he isn't with Ace, he is with Mel, and Mel was with him in season 24, and then obviously left at the end of season 24, I assume, and then they introduced Ace at the end of season 24, and she continued into season 25 and 6. I think my only big criticism that I can think of this story is that there are quite a few too many side characters. I mean, I like all the side characters, but for the fact that because there's so many of them, I feel like the Doctor gets pushed to the sideline or pushed to the back. But then I guess it makes it more sort of impactful when he is on or in the story, when he does step up to the mic, as it were, like when he's, you know, formidable against, or really formidable and awesome against the Dalek Emperor. And the Dalek Emperor sounds like a badass Nicholas Briggs gives an awesome performance, as always, as the Daleks, as well as the Emperor Dalek, and that. There are some, as I say, it's just sort of things that remind me of new series stories, like, for example, there's a line in this that is very similar to that of like Hellbent, where one of the army dudes says, it said it said that the Doctor of War, you know that. Oh, you know when the Doctor of War is here because he's always unarmed, and the Doctor says something like that. To the Dalek Emperor, and then there's another bit where there's reference to the oncoming storm and that's very Ninth Doctor-esque. So it's weird. This story, if I'm not mistaken, was aired it released in 2015. So yeah, it's weird. Although it's a Seventh Doctor story, it does take quite a bit from the new series. So and then also the title "We Are the Daleks" sort of comes into play into the story, and when it is said, it made me feel very uneasy and unsettled, and it's explained as to why the top of this tower has like a Dalek sort of dome and an eye stalk and that's pretty cool as well. The sound effect for the Dalek blasts are proper old school, Dalek blasts and that, so that's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's nice that this story, although doesn't have Davros in it, has still a very big, formidable sort of baddie, as it were, other than just the Daleks, I guess. It makes it feel a bit more impactful and a bit substantial in terms of its status, in terms of its status amongst the Dalek stories, I guess. It feels more like a monthly range, 4-part, fleshed out, more developed version of, say, something like Energy of the Daleks. Energy of the Daleks isn't bad by any means, but this just feels like, as I say, a lot more fleshed out and a lot more sort of, it feels like it has a lot more to play with, really. But then again, Energy of the Daleks is only a 1-hour story. This is a 2-hour story, so that makes sense. Mel here is very very good, very interesting. She actually uses the one characteristic that she supposedly was meant to have in the classic series very effectively here at a few points, which is that she's supposed to be a really cool and good even computer programmer, and we see that actually come to fruition in this story, which is always awesome. So yeah, there's actually like a payoff to the classic series, saying that she's a good computer programmer and that. And there's a lot of interesting side characters and twists and turns and that, and part of this story kind of reminds me of episode 1 of Star Wars, Phantom Menace, which with certain boring sort of dialogue-y things and federations and trade federations of sorts, which sort of parts, I guess, but it's all done very tastefully and very interestingly as well. And there's just a lot of different ideas and concepts, and a lot of them land in the places that they need to, and that it's like this story was very much planned out from beginning, middle, and end, and that. I think this would be a really cool. I know a lot of people have said online, like, which stories from Big Finish would you ever like being animated if they ever animated one? Some. I think this would be a really cool one, because there are a lot of cool, like, sort of visuals and that, and space battles and stuff, like stuff that makes me think, like, Into the Dalek, sort of beginning of Into the Dalek, but on a quite bigger scale than that. And I mean, it's kind of weird to think that the Doctor and Mel don't have a lot of scenes together, so that was kind of weird. And that, it's kind of weird, because although they have the pre-title sequence stuff, and then they have almost like a cliffhanger there, then the title sequence, and then the rest of the story, then they still try and do another cliffhanger, to which I think at that point it becomes a bit difficult. Like, you almost get 2 cliffhangers per story, so you're getting double the amount of cliffhangers almost, to which obviously it varies from effectiveness to effectiveness, or varies from really good cliffhangers to really sort of missing the mark and naff and crap cliffhangers, really, and that's so that was quite quite interesting. The audio design is, you know, pitch perfect and that, which is to be expected by the 201st release they've done in the month of Range. You wouldn't expect any different from the audio quality. That's all tip-top shape. Again, I just wish maybe Sylvester McCoy's Doctor was in it a bit more, and maybe have part 3 be tweaked a bit. And that maybe as well, and have little bits here and there be explained a little bit better, and that maybe, and that, because I was a little bit confused, like, only a little bit, maybe sort of 5-10% out of like 100. I was only like confused a little bit, but you know, so it's not the most airtight story ever, but it's far from being one of the worst stories I've ever listened to, and I would easily give We Are the Daleks a 10 out of 10. Very, very, very good Dalek story. Very impactful and very interesting, and yeah, I'm interested to see where this fits in the sort of timeline, and yeah, the timeline of the Dalek stories. So yeah, 10 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Comment, rate, and subscribe.